Yeah, so we've been discussing, as kind of a digression, the issue of how the Avos kept the Torah before it was given. And we looked at two particular questions. One was the question of Yaakov marrying two sisters, and the other was the question of the Shvatim marrying their sisters. And again, even if it's referring to sisters from a different mother, you still have the problem that the Torah prohibits a half-sister, and we talked about that yesterday. So I just want to mention one other interesting question in which the Avos keeping the Torah seems to be contrary to other halachos, and that is the keeping of Shabbos. We know that the Gemara says, Goy sheshavas, if a non-Jew keeps Shabbos, chayav misa, they are deserving of death. Now that doesn't mean we actually execute them, but in God's book, they are deserving of death because Shabbos was given exclusively to the Jewish people, and therefore a non-Jew is not supposed to keep Shabbos. Now what that means is very interesting. Some say that even a non-Jew is supposed to consider Shabbos a special day because, a non-Jew is supposed to believe in Hashem. A non-Jew is not supposed to worship Avodah Zarah. And Shabbos commemorates the fact that Hashem made the world in 6 days. So there are actually some Sfarim that actually advocate that non-Jews should have a special Shabbos service, a special Shabbos davening, and they should even have a special Shabbos meal. It's a little bit of a chiddush because the Gemara seems to imply they shouldn't be involved in Shabbos, but they interpret the prohibition against a non-Jew keeping Shabbos as a non-Jew cannot keep all the 39 malachos, meaning they have to be mechalel Shabbos. In fact, the emes is, this is our minhag. Even when a non-Jew is preparing for conversion, for gerus, they are told they have to violate Shabbos at least once. So even though they want to practice to keep Shabbos, so they keep Shabbos 95% of the time, they're mechuyev to be mechalel Shabbos, like turn on a bathroom light or whatever, in order that they shouldn't fall within the category of a goy sheshavas, a non-Jew who keeps Shabbos, is chayiv misa. Of course, there's a little joke that they tell, I probably may have said it before, over the years, about a non-Jew who was preparing for gerus, and he was the biggest masmid in the yeshiva. He would be learning all the time, really, really. And, in a way, people resented it because he was so frum and such a big masmid that he made other people look bad. So somebody went over to him and said, you think you're such a righteous person. He says, I want you to know you're doing Averas. You keep Shabbos 100% meticulously, better than we keep Shabbos. But you're sinning because you're a goy sheshavas chayiv misa, right? So don't think you're so great. So the guy looked up and said, don't worry about it, I carry in your Erev. Which means, so he basically said, your Erev is Chelek Shabbos, so I'm Yaitse it that particular way. Yeah.
Does a person have to have in mind, let's just say a guy just on the weekend decides that they happen to not do the 39 levels.
No, it's absolutely a matter of intention, meaning he intends to keep the day of Shabbos as a special day by refraining from malacha. If it happens to be he didn't do any malacha because he slept all day or got drunk or whatever it would be, that would not be a violation of this principle.
And what about if it was a Seventhday Adventist who they're not doing it for the same reason?
Well, they kind of are doing it for the same reason. The Seventhday Adventist is doing it because he believes that this is the day that God rested. So I think that would be a problem there. Well, the truth is, the Seventh-day Adventist doesn't. They keep Saturday as the Sabbath, but they don't keep the 39 malachos. I believe they'll pick up the telephone and turn on a light. So it's not going to be the same thing as a Jewish Shabbos. Yeah.
I was learning a couple of days ago in Shabbos Malta that there's also an issue with the hashkafa of a non-Jew on Shabbat, in terms of treating it and acting as if everything, like the perfection of the day, and refraining from work and relying on Hashem to
So he said that was wrong or not?
That's problematic.
Oh, that's interesting. So apparently there's a machlokas here. In other words, there was a very chashuv Rav in Yerushalayim who was nifter just a few months ago, Rav Yoel Schwartz. In fact, he was the father-in-law of our Baal Koreh on Shabbos, And Rav Yoel Schwartz was a chashuva person. He was a Rosh Yeshiva, different. He wrote many, many Sfarim. And one of his projects was he was involved in Kira for B'nai Noach. He was actually involved in bringing non-Jews to keep the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. And he is the one who specifically took the position that a Ben Noach should celebrate Shabbos as long as they don't keep the 39 malachas. Now you're telling me that Rav Pinkus took a different position, that the whole idea of Shabbos does not belong to the non-Jew. Okay, that's the pashtus. The truth is, the pashtus of the Gemara is exactly what he said, but Rav Schwartz perhaps had a little bit of a chiddush. So apparently there's a machlokas regarding whether the non-Jew should make something special about Shabbos. Now, I knew, by the way, I knew a person. I know a person. I think he's still around. He was a rabbi. He was a weekend rabbi, meaning he had a regular job during the week, and on Shabbos he was the rav of a shul. But on Sunday, he was the rav of a non-Jewish congregation, in which he conducted services under the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach. So they did it on Sunday, just like the Christians do it on Sunday. But God forbid, this was not a Christian service. This was a Ben Noach service. Well, what does a Ben Noach do at a service? It's not so simple. You got to create a service. There's no sitter. There's no existing sitter. But whatever, he put together a service, and there are. If you Google B'nai Noach or Noahides, you will discover that there are congregations throughout the world that are trying to keep the Sheva Mitzvahs B'nai Noach, and they have synagogues, I'm not sure what they call it, synagogues or prayer groups and the like. And again, it is absolutely not Christianity. It is B'nai Noach. They believe in Torah, they believe in the Torah Shebaal Peh, except they believe that was given to Jews, and B'nai Noach have different obligations. And some of them eventually convert to Judaism, and some of them not. Some of them want to remain righteous B'nai Noach. Remember, the Rambam paskins, that Chasidei Umos HaOlam, righteous Gentiles who keep the Noahide laws, they have a share in Olam Haba. So you figure it's a good deal. Why should I become Jewish and then have all of these 613? I can be B'nai Noach and keep the basic 7, and that will give me a share in Olam Haba. So it's interesting that he conducted his Noahide service on Sunday. I'm wondering if it was because of something that Rabbi said, that Shabbos is not for non-Jews. Yeah.
What sort of books did these people read?
I didn't hear you.
What sort of books did these people read, or were they?
You can check. There are a lot of websites. I mean, they can read a lot of things. Number one, they'll read Tanakh. They'll read the Jewish Bible, usually in English. Most of them don't know Hebrew, and there is a growing literature produced by rabbis, mainly produced by Jewish rabbis, explaining, because you have to understand. I got an email from a Noahide, like he felt kind of impatient. He says, God is only telling me to keep 7 laws. Like, what's next? I don't kill, I don't steal. What am I supposed to do with my life? So the truth of the matter is, many of the Noahide Rabbanim make the point that just like for a Jew, the 613 is our foundation, but then we have Musar, and we think about life, and we think about morality. So Ben Noach has the same type of issue. So a lot of ideas about ethics, about Bein Adam L'Chaveiro, about interpersonal behavior, about praying to God, thinking about Hashem, that would apply to a non-Jew as well. Now, so therefore, a lot of Jewish texts would be appropriate to them, but they would have to be adapted or rewritten, as it were, to make them more of a universal aspect. But many of the ideas, let's say a sefer like Mesilas Yesharim, that can be, rewritten and adapted for B'nai Noach in terms of the central points of their lives. So the 7 laws are the basic standard, but then there's a whole spiritual existence that one tries to develop. Yeah.
Can B'nai Noach learn Torah Stam? And also, can they reach or obtain a higher level in a long thought than a Jew?
Yeah, so that's another issue. So now there's one rule is a Ben Noach is not supposed to keep Shabbos. That's one thing. Another rule is a Ben Noach is not supposed to learn Torah. It says a Ben Noach who learns Torah is also Chayiv Misa, because Torah belongs to the Jewish people. So that creates a huge, huge question. What do we mean that a goy cannot learn Torah? What does that exactly mean? So A few things. Number one, the written Torah for sure can be learned, even if that incorporates some interpretations of Chazal. Number two, anything connected to the 7 mitzvahs of Noach may be learned. Number three, things that are connected to belief in Hashem and purpose of life, even if it draws on Torah sources, can be learned because that's relevant to their avodah. So if you think about it, number four, you're allowed to tell a guy basic ideas of Judaism. So for example, a guy sees me carrying a lulav and an esrog, and the guy asks me, what's that? So I don't have to tell him, I'm sorry, I'm not allowed to teach you Torah. You can explain in a simple way what the lulav and the esrog is, what the sukkah is. So really, when all the dust settles, the only thing a guy is not allowed to learn is in-depth Gemara. You know, you don't sit down with a guy and learn Gemara with him. Even Kabbalah, there's some question. Kabbalah might be okay if it's connected to direct spirituality as opposed to theoretical structures. Now, even then, we have a big machlokes. Okay, I don't teach a guy Gemara. I don't go into depth in halacha with a guy because that's analytical learning of Torah. But what if he's a guy who is preparing for conversion? So there is a marsha that says that once he is committed to a conversion process, he is permitted to learn Torah, meaning it's only when he doesn't want to convert, as it were, that you have a problem. Yeah.
So if a non-Jew is not allowed to learn Torah in depth, then it's pretty clear then that the Avos and the Shvatim were really considered Jews, because we learned that, I think this is in the Midrash, right, that Yaakov Avinu and Yosef, the last thing they learned was about the donkey that you hit in the back of the head, and that's certainly like,
the calf, not the donkey.
The calf that you hit. That's certainly only in regards to Jews.
Okay, well, I'll talk about that. That's a very good point. Yeah.
So Goyim can't learn Gemara in depth.
Yeah.
But you said that they can learn things related to the Sheva Mitzvos.
Right.
So can they learn the sugyas related to the Sheva Mitzvos?
So that's a machlokas, meaning some say that even in the areas they are permitted to learn, it has to be kind of bottom line oriented without getting into all of the depth. Others say if it pertains to the Sheva Mitzvos, you can go over everything, even the Ian. So that's a machlokas. Yeah.
My other question was just that can Goyim who are B'nai Noah obtain a higher level of knowledge than a Jew?
Yeah, I think inevitably that would have to be the case because so many Jews can do things in which they will forfeit Olam Haba, and a guy can gain Olam Haba by keeping the 7 mitzvahs. So by definition, there can be a guy that has a higher madrega than a Jew because the Jew might be down to 0, theoretically. Yeah.
The whole idea of like that both Jews and non-Jews have like the foundational mitzvahs and then they still learn like the other things. But isn't like Moshe and all these things still like don't they have their foundations in like things? I mean, they say they'll have to learn like Malta.
Yeah.
I mean, Brian's don't really have that. So what's the?
Well, you say Goyim don't really have that. So that's an interesting question. Let me share with you a very interesting yesod of the Ran. If you look in the Navi Yechaz, Sodom and Amorah was destroyed because they were evil cities, right? Now, what exactly was evil about them? What was the thing that made them evil? So the Navi Yechezkel says that the sin of Sodom and Amorah was lack of compassion for the poor and the needy. And we have many midrashim how, they didn't allow beggars into the city and the like. So Sodom and Amorah were destroyed not because of sodomy, not because of the homosexuality, that's another medrash, but it was destroyed because of cruelty, callousness, lack of rachamim, not taking care of the poor, because Sodom was very prosperous. So the Ran asks a very simple question. What Avera is a non-Jew transgressing when he doesn't help the poor? If you look at the 7 mitzvahs of Noach, tzedakah is not one of the 7 mitzvahs of Noach. So you can't point to any one of the 7 mitzvahs that they transgressed. So if they didn't transgress anything, then how could God punish them for not giving tzedakah and not taking care of people? So the Ran says, a gewaldige chiddush, the Ran says, there are certain things that a human being is supposed to figure out on their own because they're in the image of God. You should have figured it out. God didn't have to command you. And that is, you figure out that when people are suffering, you help them. You figure out that when people are in trouble, you show compassion. You don't need a commandment to know that that's what you do. And therefore, Sodom was destroyed, not because they violated a technical commandment. Sodom was destroyed because they didn't have the basic decency that a human being is supposed to have. Now, the reason why that's relevant to your question is you talk about Musar, you talk about, a guy doesn't have the mitzvah of V'ahavta l'recha kamocha. You're correct, he doesn't have the mitzvah. But, like the Ran says, there are certain things that a decent human being is supposed to know, is supposed to figure out. And Hashem will hold us to account if we don't have those basic ideas that a person should know. So that is why inyanim of Musar, the inyanim of how to relate to another person, how to treat other people, that has a shaykhus to a non-Jew as well. And that comes from, in a meta sense, that comes from Tselem Elokim. That comes from the idea that every human being is in the image of God, whatever that means exactly, and therefore they're entitled to that respect. They're entitled to that dignity, and that applies both in terms of how a Jew relates to a non-Jew and certainly how a non-Jew relates to a non-Jew and the like. So the issue of technicalities of not having V'ahavta kamocha, that's not going to be the end of the issue. Yeah. Well, I don't know if the Ran needs a source. The Ran is a source.
What is the source that?
No, but the Ran. Where does the Ran say it?
Yeah.
It's in the sefer called Drushos Haran. I can tell you, I can send it to you where it is exactly. The Ran, the Ran wrote many things. The Ran is Rabbeinu Nisim, one of the great Rishonim. He was a Talmud of the Ritva, and the Ran you're familiar with because the Ran wrote a huge commentary on the Rif, which is in the back of the Gemara and many Masechtas, the Ran. And the Ran also wrote Chidushim on Shas. The Ran wrote Shelos Utshuvos. But in addition to all of that, the Ran wrote a sefer of Jewish philosophy, essays, called the Drushos of the Ran. In fact, just recently, just like last year or 2 years ago, Art Scroll translated it, so you can actually get Drushos Haran in English. It is a classic book in many, many ways, so you may want to get hold of Drushos Haran. Yeah.
So this notion that there's, by non-Jews, certain things they should kind of figure out for
Yeah.
themselves, does that also exist by Jews? Because, let's say tzedakah, I imagine there's a specific commandment of tzedakah, so we wouldn't have to figure that out by ourselves. Is there something that...
Yeah, well, again, in legal philosophy, this is called the idea of natural law, right? The natural means certain things are just part of the nature of the world, and you should figure them out. And basically what the Ran is saying is that in Judaism, there is something called natural law. Now, the Ran is not just saying it by Goyim, the Ran is saying it by Jews as well. There are things that we're supposed to figure out, things we're supposed to understand. Now, you may then ask the question, so why did God give us a mitzvah of tzedakah? You could ask that question, meaning, if indeed I'm supposed to figure it out, then why does Hashem bichlal give me a mitzvah of tzedakah? I should have figured it out on my own. That's true, but again, tzedakah has halachos, tzedakah has limitations, tzedakah has priorities. So there are many, many details in the halachic system that I might not be able to reconstruct on my own. So that's why we have a halacha of tzedakah.
Is there an example of something that we don't have in the Torah that we should figure out by ourselves?
Right now I don't have an example. My only example is a Gemara in Eruvin, which says the following. The Gemara in Eruvin says that if the Torah wouldn't command us to be modest, tzanias, we would learn it from a cat. Right? Cats do all of their affairs in private. So the implication is, but that's a hypothetical, we would have been able to understand things from nature. The implication is that we should look at nature, the nature of the world, and understand certain things. Okay, so all of this is good. Again, this Ran is a very, very important Ran. to be aware of. But the question is, let's take Shabbos. So the question is, Avram Avinu kept the whole Torah before it was given, so our assumption is he kept Shabbos. But how could he keep Shabbos on a voluntary basis if halachically he's a ben Noach? If you go with that idea, then a ben Noach is not allowed to keep Shabbos. So how could Avram Avinu keep Shabbos? It's one thing to be machmir. He's machmir, he kept kosher, because a guy is allowed to keep kosher, so he kept kosher. But he can't be machmir to keep Shabbos if a guy is not allowed to keep Shabbos. Yeah.
Well, because sorry, I don't want to be jumping the gun, but I was because Hashem hasn't chosen the Jewish people as
Yeah.
special people, so he's there so that whoever that goy was didn't interpose himself. It wasn't stealing. There was nothing.
That's actually an excellent answer, and that is the following. Some say, exactly as you said, Baruch Hashem, that you were mechaber to this, that the isser of a goy keeping Shabbos is because he's stealing the gift that God gave to the Jewish people. Now, it's true that Abraham is not yet commanded on Shabbos, but he's not stealing from the Jewish people because he, number one, the future Jewish people aren't here yet, and number two, he is the ancestor of those people. So it's not shayach to say that Avram Avinu is appropriating a gift that Hashem gave to others. And by the way, that would also be the answer for Torah learning. How could the Avos learn Torah? Same thing. The problem of learning Torah is, once again, the guy is taking the gift of the Jewish people. Avram cannot be stealing from his own family, so to speak. Okay, so that's answer number one. That's a very good answer, I think. Let me give you answer number two. This is the Chassam Sofer brings. The first answer, I believe, although I don't remember for sure, I believe the first answer is from the Turei Even, the Shagas Aryeh, same person. The second answer is the Chassam Sofer brings from his Rebbe, Rav Nosson Adler. Now, Rav Nosson Adler, again, I could talk a lot about that. The Chassam Sofer is very famous, right? Everyone has heard of the Chassam Sofer, one of the Gedolei Achrayim. But Chassam Sofer's Rebbe is a very enigmatic figure. He's Rav Nosson Adler, didn't write anything. There's absolutely nothing we have from him. He was very, very private. He was not involved in any publicity whatsoever. But you see from the Chassam Sofer, who had tremendous kavod for him, you can see how great Rav Nosson Adler must have been from the fact that the Chassam Sofer, who was an undisputed Gadol Shebegdolim, was machshiv Rav Nosson Adler tremendously. They say that Rav Nosson Adler didn't write his chidushim. They found in his svarim, after he died, like every word had a dot on it, like a pencil dot by every word. And that represented an observation that he had. And he once explained that you're really not allowed to write Torah Shebaal Peh. The only heter of writing Torah Shebaal Peh is you might forget it. So he says, since I never forget anything, I'm not allowed to write the Torah Shebaal Peh. That's a very shver teretz, because the issue is not, do you remember or don't you remember? The issue is, other people will forget. Your Talmidim will forget, right? So to say, because I remember, I don't have to write anything, I'm not allowed to write anything down, is a very shver teretz. So again, you never know if these ma'asim are true or not true. I don't even know if the ma'aseh is true, but this is the ma'aseh that they say. But the Chassam Sofer brings from Rav Nosson Adler the following chap. He says, we know that the definition of a day in Judaism starts at night, right? The day begins from the night, right? Shabbos begins Friday night, Shabbos day, right? We begin not from midnight and not from sunrise. We begin from sunset, or technically Tseis HaKochavim, which is a little after sunset. That's called what? Hayom Holech Achar Halayla. The day follows the preceding night. Right? It begins from the Laila. Now, Rav Nosson Adler wants to be mechadesh that became operative only by Matan Torah. By Matan Torah, God changed the rules for Jews so that the day begins from the night. But under the pre-Matan Torah law, which was the Noahide law, it's day and night. Instead of night, day, it's day, night. Now, you may ask a kasha on that. You say, well, wait a second here. That doesn't seem right. Because what is the source that the day starts from the night? It's the beginning of Bereshis, where it says, Vayihi Erev. It was night and it was day, and that equals Yom. So how can you say that that's a Matan Torah innovation when in fact it goes back to the creation of the world? But here is the thing you need to understand. When were those verses written down? Yeah, they're describing the creation of the world, but they were written down at Matan Torah. So God did not reveal that idea of the day starting from the night until Matan Torah. So even though in the Torah it is referring to Brias HaOlam, but that itself was not written down until Matan Torah. When was Chumash Bereshis written? Chumash Bereshis, the Rashi explains, was actually written right before the Ten Commandments. God dictated from Bereshis to Matan Torah. Then Moshe gets the Ten Commandments. Remember, the Torah was written over 40 years. In other words, after everything happened, Moshe wrote, Hashem dictated what to write. So Chumash Bereshis did not exist as a Chumash till Matan Torah. And therefore, the Chiddush, says Rav Nassan Adler, of Vayi Erev Biker is only after Matan Torah. So therefore, he says the following. Therefore, he says, so there are two Chiddushim here. Pre-Matan Torah, it's day-night. Post-Matan Torah, it's night-day. But then, he adds, Noahides continue to be governed by the pre-Matan Torah status even today. That's a separate chiddush, really, but these are two nekudas. Pre-Matan Torah and Noahides, even after Matan Torah. So Mamela, he says like this. So the definition of Shabbos for a Noahide is Saturday morning and Saturday night. The definition of Shabbos for a Yid is Friday night and Saturday. So Avram Avinu did Malacha Saturday night. So that way, he has his cake and he eats it too. Because he kept the Shabbos of a Jew and he violated the Shabbos of a Ben Noach. And therefore, of course, this would be a tremendous chiddush. According to Rav Nassan Adler, which we don't paskin like, a candidate for Geirus could do the same thing. A candidate for Geirus could theoretically keep Shabbos Lagamri and do Malacha Motzei Shabbos, and that would be fine. So obviously we don't paskin like this. But this was his chap, that Avram Avinu did Malacha Motzei Shabbos, so he was Mechalel, the Shabbos of a Goy, and he was Mekayem, the Shabbos of a Yid. Yeah.
Well, even according to the idea that the Torah really revealed something about the Bria, well then it was already in the Bria, it's just that the Torah revealed it. So therefore for Goyim too, it should be night day, because the Bria Batchila was already night day.
Yeah. Right? But apparently it's true. It's true that, I hear what you're saying. It's a good question. But apparently, although it's true that Hashem built into the Bria the notion of night and day, but since that was not yet a revealed phenomenon, so people would go with their instinct, and they were permitted to go with their instinct, that the day begins at sunrise. That apparently that would be the natural default rule, which is interesting, because modern society doesn't do that either. Modern society starts the day at midnight. But apparently the default rule would have been sunrise is the start of a new day. That would be it. In fact, Sidurim seems to imply that, right? Why is Shachris the first? look at a regular siddur. Why is Shachris first? It ought to be Mariv ought to be first, right? I mean, and yet every siddur is Shachris, Mincha, Mariv. So apparently the natural instinct of a person is the new day begins. I mean, we even talk this way. The new day begins when I get up from sleeping, right? But so that's how Bnei Noach were allowed to behave. Yeah.
So according to this, how do we understand the notion of the Torah that teaches that the Avos in the entire Torah?
Well, the difference would be they knew the Torah. They knew the Torah. Yeah, they knew the Torah. But halachically, it didn't become a mandatory thing. So halachically, in fact, that's what we're saying. Avram Avinu kept Shabbos as defined by the Torah. But since the obligatory aspect was the Noahide definition, he was able to be Mechalel Shabbos that way. Now, a third answer, which the Chassam Sofer, I believe, also gives, is Avram Avinu was Mechalel Shabbos by wearing tzitzis. Now, this is a very, very interesting chap as well. We know when there's no Erev, right, I'm not allowed to carry on Shabbos, right? I can't carry from inside to outside or walk 4 amos in a public domain. But we also know that whatever is considered an article of clothing is not considered carrying. So I'm not carrying my shirt, my jacket, my overcoat, and the like, right? That's a beged. So what about tzitzis, right? How can you wear tzitzis and walk outside on Shabbos? Why isn't the tzitzis an act of carrying? And the answer is that since the Torah requires that you put tzitzis on a 4-cornered garment, the tzitzis is part of your garment. But, he says, that's only true for a Jew who has a mitzvah of tzitzis. If a guy were to wear tzitzis on Shabbos, the guy would be carrying. There's no sin to that, but the carry. That's why it's good. So Avraham Avinu wore tzitzis on Shabbos. So that's great. As a Jew, he kept Shabbos because he kept tzitzis. As a Ben Noach, he was Mechalel Shabbos by doing a malacha. Right? So that would be the way that he could simultaneously desecrate Shabbos as a guy and keep Shabbos as a Jew. Yeah.
So did Tzara Yemenu wear tzitzis too?
I didn't hear you there.
Did Tzara Yemenu also wear tzitzis in that case?
Oh, how did Tzara Yemenu? That I don't know. That's a good question. The teretz, unless she also wore tzitzis, maybe she was a feminist. Of course, keep in mind, let me just remind you about women wearing tzitzis. Interesting problem. There's no clear halacha why a woman cannot wear tzitzis. Remember, the only reason women are exempt from tzitzis is because it's a mitzvah saseh shezman garama. It's a time-bound positive commandment because we don't wear tzitzis at night. But women are allowed to do time-bound commandments. They can do lulav, they can do sukkah, they can do shofar. Now the Ramah says a woman shouldn't wear tefillin, although logically even tefillin would be okay because tefillin requires special guf naki, etc., and because of menstruation and the like, a woman cannot be careful in guf naki. All right, so that's tefillin, but that doesn't apply to tzitzis. So it is actually an interesting question, why can't a woman wear tzitzis if she wants? Now some say, well, if she wears a talis, a regular talis, that's like wearing a male garment, okay? But let's assume you have a feminine designed thing with tzitzis. It's not so pashut that's the minhag is not to do it, obviously, but you can't really point to a source that's wrong. I mean, just think about it. Why would tzitzis be worse than taking a lulav? A woman for sure can take a lulav. No one's going to be critical of that at all. So my shna, analytically, tzitzis and lulav are exactly the same issue because it's a mitzvah cessation on grandma. So I don't know. So maybe Sarah did wear tzitzis. Yeah.
And I've heard this before, but I've always wondered what makes tzitzis not part of the belief. Like for example, by the same token, someone could say like buttons are not part of it.
Yes, so I'll tell you the truth. The issue, I mean, Baruch Hashem, most places have Erevs, so we don't think about it so much. But the issue of what parts of your clothing are parts of your clothing are not as cut and dry as you might think. So, for example, if you have extra buttons, like often in a suit jacket, right, there might be buttons in here in case you lose a button. It's not so pashut that extra buttons that are not serving a function in the garment are not considered carrying, meaning, so a lot of extra fringes and the like might in fact be a problem when there's no Erev. So when there's no Erev, you got to be actually very sensitive to what you're wearing. A lot of extra stuff might not be permitted on Shabbos.
So anything that's extra that doesn't have a function is considered carrying? Like embroidery or anything?
Well, the thing is, we do recognize that aesthetics can also be a function, meaning if it's something that makes the garment look nicer, that would also be called part of the garment. It doesn't have to. Yeah, but I'm saying that's why I gave an example. But an extra button that's inside the coat is not it's not serving the coat like the buttons that you have, and it's also not adding to the aesthetics because nobody sees it.
Even one that keeps the pocket shut.
Yeah, keep the pocket shut inside, or just whatever. They have just extra buttons sewn in the jacket itself to.
If for people who wear their seat out, then that would not be a problem, right?
I think there would be a question. Do we consider that an aesthetic adornment or the like? Meaning, if it's not commonly, in other words, if you don't have a mitzvah of tzitzis, those fringes are not commonly viewed as something aesthetic. I mean, if a guy were to simply wear tzitzis, people would think he's crazy, meaning it doesn't necessarily qualify as an adornment. Yeah.
Is most of this learned in Perek of Shabbos?
Yeah. Yeah.
How's there not a problem with the mitzvah of Avera because we're saying that because if there's a mitzvah to do it, it's not caring. Like we're changing it definitionally. Why can't I go the other way around? Say no, really, you're trying to say even though you have this mitzvah, it's Avera. Like you shouldn't be able to do that.
Right. So the short answer is that it's true that if you're, for example, I steal a lulav. When I steal a lulav, I clearly did an Avera. I'm now trying to do a mitzvah via the Avera, so that's called mitzvah babi Avera. But here, something is an Avera definitionally only if it doesn't belong to the garment. So in this case, it's not simply I'm doing a mitzvah. Rather, since the mitzvah is that my garment has to have these fringes, that makes the fringes part of the garment. So once it's part of the garment, it's not a mitzvah I'm doing through an Avera. There is no Avera because wearing a garment and everything that's part of the garment is not an Avera to begin with, you see? So that's why it's going to be okay. Okay, so that's kind of Bekitzer, the Shalkavataria. Again, there are many other areas that are discussed about the Avos keeping the whole Torah before it was given. Okay, have a good Shabbos. Good week.